All right. Welcome to this week's live office hours. Casey, how's it going?
Things are good. Things are good. Yeah, it's cold in Boston, but the sun's shining bright. And yeah, excited to dive in with folks today. See what's top of
Yeah.
mind here.
Yeah. A lot of things we're working on. You see the team in the back there working through some different things, which is pretty exciting. So we'll have some big announcements here in the coming weeks. Um, but to kind of get the ball rolling, I'm paying a lot more attention to what's happening on Walmart, obviously. And they're doing something cool. They just added 2D barcodes like in app, which is amazing. So you don't really need a third party tool to do this for you. I like that. I like some of this native approach kind of stuff. It makes a lot of sense. But at the same time, I got notified of that. There's some brand gating happening. And so this goes and harks back to what I talked about in a lot of podcasts in the past few weeks, which is Walmart's not necessarily a greener pasture thing. It's new. There's going to be a lot less restrictions and limitations, but those things will occur. They're just going to be slightly different. So we're already starting to see some of those. It looks like from the list, I did not recognize a single brand in the list. So they're definitely different brands. So I don't think it's going to be super impactful, right? It's not like Nike or Lego or any of the big popular seller brands that people tend to like to jump on. So less impactful, but still pretty interesting. And then I wanted to understand how Walmart is really growing, because it seems from the outside, if you're just looking at seller sentiment, what you see on social media, growing like crazy. But this stat, let me pull this up here. This was pretty interesting. Okay, so Walmart had a market share of 4.4% in 2017.
Mhm.
They closed apparently 2024 with a 10.6% share of the market. That is
Wow.
a huge growth. I mean, granted, a lot of years, sure, but still, that's a decent amount of the market. And really, it wasn't towards, I would say, the latter half of 2024 where things really started to grow. You could see them investing, really pushing things. Selling on Walmart's been around for a while, but it hasn't been nearly what it is now.
Mhm.
So I'm curious to see how that's going to continue. Now, granted, Amazon has like 3-4 times, maybe even 5 times the market share that Walmart has, but they're growing, and that's the impactful thing here. I was not joking around. I was messing around last night with ChatGPT, having a conversation about the growth on Walmart and all these different things, and even ChatGPT kind of got it. It was like, you know what? It seems like it's easier for people. It's a growing market. There's less sellers. I forget the exact data points in terms of number of sellers, but it was basically to the tune of 150,000 resellers on Walmart compared to 2 to 3 million active sellers on Amazon. So smaller size pie, certainly, but the pie is growing year after year, month over month. And I don't know, there's just something interesting about it. And so it's kind of interesting to kind of hear it on the street, so to speak, right? We're in a lot of these communities. I'm in countless Discord groups at this point. And now to really dive deeper into the data, you're like, yeah, this makes a lot of sense what we're seeing.
Yeah, and out of curiosity, Dylan, when you say like 10% market share, is that 10% of all online sales? Is that 10% of all third-party sellers? Like,
Yeah,
what's that specific metric that was being measured there?
that if I forget exactly how they did. They didn't clarify here. Let me see if I can go a little bit deeper here
Yeah,
because
and it
that's a
makes
great
sense. I
point.
mean, especially from 2017 to now, like you said, a decent amount of years had gone by, but Walmart
Mhm.
really hadn't focused on this channel really
Yeah,
until the last 12 to 18 months. They may have been working on it behind the scenes for however
totally.
long, but in terms of outward marketing pushes and really it being visible to third party sellers,
Yeah.
people shopping on Walmart, that really hasn't started to happen until the last 12 months. So I would just be curious what that specific metric was there. Yeah.
Yeah, so let's take a look at this. So this is from October last year, so a little old, but that's why I'm saying it's projecting at 10.6. I'm curious to see where they ended up.
Yeah.
Um, but from what I'm reading here, it's basically market share of e-commerce. Um, Granted, Amazon's the vast majority of that. So in 2017, Amazon held 36.4% share of the top 2,000 North American online retailers. Wow. Today it's projected to reach 39, so almost 40%. Meanwhile, Walmart's share has more than doubled from 4.4 to a projected 10.6%. Combined, they account for over 50% of all global online sales within the top 2,000. So, of course, there's always going to be those little mom and pop e-commerce stores and retailers and stuff like that.
Sure.
I mean, this is crazy to fathom this level of, I mean, two players. And like you're saying, they've been around for a while, but now they're really starting to push. You're seeing ads. We've talked about that for consumers. Walmart Plus is starting to grow like crazy. I was looking at their the ad revenue from some of their stuff that they're doing, and it's also growing like crazy. So this is a growing arm. It seems like, when Walmart came out with online, it was kind of a secondary thing, something they just had to do, but to them, they were brick and mortar retailer. Now it seems like they're shifting their identity to, yeah, we still have brick and mortar and that's its own arm of the business, but e-commerce is where we need to triple down. We need to compete with Amazon, and they're directly doing it. They're not saying, we want to be really great at e-commerce. They're directly going after Amazon, which is so interesting. Yeah. So yeah, we're diving into a lot of this stuff because there's a lot of differences too, right? I think this is something we talked about previously. We're finding these subtle nuances that sellers are experiencing, like the BSR, right? So the BSR for Amazon, pretty straightforward. We all kind of understand what that is and how it works and how it relates to sales velocity. But if you look at the BSR on Walmart, it's very different, and it's very it can lead you astray because it's not just the BSR for that product on e-commerce online. It's also factoring in sales velocity in store as well. So you could have something where you're looking at the BSR, you're like, oh, this thing flies off the shelf. Yeah, but could only be brick and mortar, and it's actually not flying off the shelves on e-com. So you end up making a bad decision. So that's why if you go on Twitter and you see how people are testing the waters, right? With Walmart doing OA as an example, you have enough data to know I can order 20 of these one shot and be totally fine. Walmart, you don't really know that. So the behavior there, the process essentially is order a few, see, and once it starts selling, then you have your own data to go off of if you want to go deeper into that SKU, or it's actually a slow mover. Okay. So in a way, Walmart sellers are still operating with some blinders on. There's more data being added. There's a lot of new software companies cropping up just to focus on Walmart data, which is amazing. But there's still not enough for people to have their process of, if I look here, here, and here, and I make those checks, I know exactly how much to order, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't seem like we're quite there yet, but I think that will change very quickly.
Yeah, and I think Walmart will find a way to kind of slice and dice their data in a way that's more favorable or easier to digest for online sellers. Obviously, right now they probably don't have an accurate way to fully split those sales up between the brick and mortar and the online channels. Yeah. And Amazon just doesn't deal with in person. I mean, they technically own Whole Foods, but that's outside of the purview of Amazon sales.
Right.
So yeah, it would be interesting once they start to kind of provide more actionable data in that area to kind of see where there may be some trends in terms of, oh, this is a great seller, but really only in person. Yeah. I know Walmart has a lot of like food and snack exclusives that are exclusive to Walmart.
Right.
Different flavors of, Cheetos, different snacks. I follow a couple influencers on Instagram, and they're always announcing new food things, and it seems like half of them are almost always exclusive to Walmart. So it'd be interesting to see that split. And then just thinking of like probably larger items, I love to buy a new TV every now and then, but I would assume that sales for online TVs are probably much smaller compared to in person. So just trying to think about just real consumer behavior and where you yourself might typically buy these items, and then trying to have that inform your decision around BSR specifically on Walmart right now, with them not being able to kind of separate the in-person versus the online sales percentages there.
Yeah. And the interesting part about like those larger products, right? The storage fees are so cheap that when I talk to sellers on Walmart, they're like, yeah, we don't really care if something sits there. Like, obviously we want to return, and like we don't want the capital to be tied up, but like that framework that we talk about for Amazon, that life cycle, right? Most Amazon sellers are doing that life cycle in like 90 days, right? So they want to be liquidating going into month 3, kind of at the latest, because you have long-term storage fees, all that stuff. That's really changing for Walmart sellers. They're like, I mean, yeah, I want to move it, but if it sits there for a while, that's fine. It's such a negligible amount, even these larger products, where they're like, yeah, it's fine. I kind of use them as a storage facility sometimes, and they let me. Like, awesome.
Mhm.
Again, all these things can change, but these are good things to keep in mind for making the transition or understanding which platform you should really hyper focus for certain SKUs, listings, things like that.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's very different. The way the buy box operates vastly different as well. So strategies from a repricing perspective are going to be very different.
Mhm.
It's actually relatively simplistic in a lot of ways, which is kind of nice, but also not as fun because I want to be super crazy with it. But you kind of can't. So yeah, it's been fun diving into a lot of this data, kind of seeing what's coming, seeing what's happening. And yeah, even the A to A, so Amazon to Amazon flips, that's a big thing. Shout out to Saul for being the godfather there. He's got some great stuff, but a lot of sellers online are talking about Walmart to Walmart flips, and they're like, it's 25% of my volume. That's
Mhm.
amazing. I mean, think about this ecosystem, right? You can go to a Walmart, do RA, and then sell it online on walmart.com. So cool, right? So cool. So the good news is you're not necessarily relearning a whole new business model. You're just transferring over your knowledge and adapting it for a different platform.
Mhm. Yeah, and one thing that's kind of interesting around like the storage fees in comparing Walmart and Amazon is with Walmart being a brick and mortar business for a much longer amount of time, they're
Yeah,
probably not worried about their storage space because they probably have an abundance of it in comparison to Amazon, where
yeah,
Amazon had to probably acquire warehouses and work on allocating space for their third party sellers, where Walmart just might have that space available. I'd be willing to bet
yeah,
that they do implement some sort of fee structure around long-term storage at some point, but
yeah,
yeah, that's one thought that I had in terms of why they might not have it initially because they currently have plenty of space to store items.
yeah. See, Eric, hoping for that Walmart repressor like kids on Christmas. Well, um, Eric, you won't have to wait till Christmas to unwrap your gift. So I will say that. See, Terry, haven't chatted in a while, man. Hope you're doing well. See, use case for Maven. This is for a product line which has map pricing, but I'm the exclusive seller. I have loaded map as the min and letting Maven experiment on the max. Is this a good use case for Maven when there is no competition aside from testing price points to maximize conversion? Yes. So I'm glad you brought this up, Terry. The cool thing about Maven is it does not require competition. So because we're calculating that optimal price, that will fluctuate as we're looking at the BSR, things like that. And so what's nice is it can go up and down even if there's no competition. So if we test a higher price, but we see the BSR as an example is starting to increase, we know, okay, that's a negative reaction. That doesn't make sense. Let's pull it down a little bit more. So it's not doing true like private label kind of repricing. Like that's its own model. But for what you're doing with wholesale and being an exclusive seller, it's going to do pretty well. So it's again, optimal price is finding the balance between sales velocity and profit margin, which is great because you're still going to move good velocity, but you're getting the most you can without negating that velocity in terms of profit margin. So yeah, I think the way you're using that is perfect.
Yeah, I'd agree. And yeah, I think that's a great use case, Terry. And it will probably just take a little bit longer for Maven to learn on that listing with there being
Yep.
less competition. So I definitely give it a few extra days than you typically would on a standard listing that has competitive sellers on it, because it will mostly it'll really only be able to assess that sales velocity with no kind of pricing competition or sales coming from other sellers. It won't be able to measure those factors. So I would
Yeah.
definitely give it a couple extra days to let it kind of optimize and learn on those listings for you.
Yeah. Basically a lot less data coming through for us to train on.
Yeah.
I am curious, what does AI repricing look like on Walmart? This is something, we haven't really gotten to that point yet. But this is something I'm asking myself a lot. How much of what we do is transferable to other platforms? It does seem like a decent amount. at first glance, which is fantastic. Means we can move super fast and create things that work amazingly well from the jump. Initially, it's like, okay, whole different platform. There's a ton of changes, and while that is kind of true, basically not really. Like, there's these subtle nuances, but there's nothing that's foundationally so different. Now, the big difference is how that buy box behavior works, right? You have this wait in line kind of concept, right? Where on Amazon, we're pulling buy boxes back and forth, multiple times a minute in a lot of cases. Whereas with Walmart, it's like, if you got it, you don't want to lose it because you're going no sales, no sales, no sales. You get it, ton of volume comes through you, and then either you sell out or it does rotate, to another seller, either a cheaper offer, what have you. So, kind of thinking through a lot of that behaviors that we're seeing, and trying to think through, strategically speaking, what's the optimal way to price on Walmart, because a lot of sellers right now are not happy with the current softwares that do Walmart repricing. Understandable after having looked into a lot of these, but they don't really need anything crazy, which is so interesting to me. But a lot of sellers are like, I have my VA go in once a day and just match the buy box, and we get back to sourcing. And they're like, I do better performance wise doing that than paying for XYZ other tool. So interesting. So it's a fun thing. It's very interesting. It's nice to jump into a whole new platform that we're unfamiliar with, because, having been an Amazon seller, you kind of go into building a software company with a lot of foundational knowledge. I've never sold on Walmart. So, we're learning a ton every single day, talking to a bunch of sellers and just wrapping our heads around it. And it's been really fun so far, but yeah, a lot of things to come. So we're in the trenches right now, so to speak.
Yeah, and it's interesting to hear that kind of approach of having a VA adjust prices once a day on Walmart, with there not being the abundance of competition that there is on Amazon. That's probably going to be more effective, or not more effective than a repricer, but more effective than it would be on or Amazon rather, just because of the far less number of sellers. So it will be interesting to see the impact a repricing tool, hopefully us in the near future, can kind of simulate that, or obviously perform better if you want to match price, reprice below, however your approach is. It'll be interesting to see if that just being automated and not having to be surveyed manually will really boost performance there.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. We're diving a lot into the APIs, data, all that good stuff, and it's a gold mine of new things. And as is always true, the documentations are not always correct. So that's always fun when it says it works like X and we're like, actually it works like Y, but okay, we'll just roll with Y then. So let's see. Eric, I have secured the buy box at a cheaper price and price up manually once a week. And so far that seems to dominate 99% buy box. Yeah. I mean, so isn't this interesting, right? So you get it, you price up manually once a week, and you move on with your life. So interesting. Now, the thing we're really diving deep into is, I always come back to this concept of what percentage of the opportunity or what percentage of optimization are you at? And my guess, just in the data I have been looking at, is doing this gets you from zero, probably somewhere between 40 and 60%. I'm going to use wide ranges here. Of optimization, of maximizing the opportunity. I think with what we could do, we could get that much higher. Once a week, not bad. Some people, again, doing it once a day. I think that's better than doing it once a week, but that's also a time-consuming process, right? Even having a VA do it, you're like, do I want them to spend an hour a day doing that or sourcing? Probably sourcing, but you don't want to spend an hour of your time, matching buy boxes and stuff like that. So it's going to be really interesting, to say the least. But yeah, this is exactly what we tend to see when we talk with sellers a lot on the Walmart platform. They're like, I'm just kind of manually doing it right now, which the moment I hear a seller say I'm manually doing something that software could do, I go, pause. That's a problem. That's a big issue. So, see, Terry, any insights into future product to help to manage reordering / replenishment. I've been underwhelmed repeatedly with others on the market. Maybe I need to revisit Restock Pro otherwise. Yeah, it's a great question. Our problem is that there are so many problems in the Amazon, Walmart seller space that the biggest challenge is not finding the problems. It's deciphering which problems are the most impactful for us to work on. That's a hard thing to do. So our roadmap as a company is about 2 to 3 years out for the most part, like in terms of broad stroke things that we want to work on. So I can't commit to this exactly, but I will say we are looking at all the problems because I agree. There's a lot of softwares trying to solve these kind of small niche problems, and it's just not happening well. I'm a big fan of Restock Pro. I use them personally. We have an integration with them, so I love them to death. But just in like the inventory management kind of areas, I mean, really every area, every software vertical in the reseller space is lacking in some way, shape, or form. Our biggest thing has been trying to change that for repricing, and I think we've done a decent enough job. We still have a long ways to go to be where we want Aura to be at, but we are looking at those other verticals as well to see what we could do. We've been in the space for probably right around a decade at this point, almost a decade, 8 or 9 years, at least in the software space. So we've seen how there's been a lack of innovation in our space, at least on the tech side. So, we're trying to kind of lead the charge there, so to speak. See John here. Any time frame on adding the ability to add in costs like prep and inbound shipping to FBA? Not yet. I don't have a time frame for you yet. If you have not already, John, go to the feedback.goaura.com and just search for that and upvote it, add a comment if you want to. That is something we are looking at, but we have some bigger things that we're actively working on right now. So it is top of mind. This is something I bring up all the time, like having this additional cost kind of functionality. So even just for me personally, I think it's a big kind of lever for us to pull for you guys. So it is top of mind. I will say that.
Yeah, that's tough to factor in with there being so many different shipping providers, different weights of products, how far you're shipping it. So with all those moving pieces, we're just trying to make sure that we implement it in the way that applies to as many people as possible, but have yet to kind of figure out what that looks like. I know some folks have requested like an additional cost field. I know folks are just hoping it's automatically added in some cases. So I'm just trying to parse through the different options, what's possible, and then what's going to be the best solution moving forward as well.
Yeah. Because you want it to be flexible too, right? Like we kind of want to take a step back. That's why I always call it the additional cost functionality, because there's a few ways you might want to do that. You might want to say, well, everything's basically $1 prep, so just assign $1 additional cost to everything. So that's like one setting. Or you might want to take the inverse approach and say, well, I'm going to add an additional cost for merchant fulfilled shipments. But that's per individual SKU. So I want to itemize it that way. There's a lot there. So we just want to make sure that whatever we build to solve that problem is very flexible, because every seller's process is so vastly different than the next.
Mm-hmm.
See Kirk, feature requests. Please give us the option to adjust the price by ROI %. Kirk, can you clarify what you mean by that? So when you say an option to adjust the price, do you mean that you would want to go and let's say your sell price right now is $25 in its FBA. You would want to go in and say, hey, reduce this by 10% and like do that in Aura. Just clarify that for me. I just want to make sure that we're on the same page there.
Now.
Go ahead, Casey. You're good.
No, I was just going to say, percentage ROIs, we do have functionality for specifically setting min and max prices based on ROI, and you can adjust prices instead of pricing below by 5 cents, for example. You can price below by a percentage of your competitor's price. So I'd be curious there, Kirk, if you mean like repricing by 5% ROI below someone. Just some more context there would be helpful.
Yeah. Let's see. Eric, hardest part for me is to be price competitive for the pro seller badge. Any insight on that? Not yet. I'm diving deep into this pro seller badge because it's funny. Walmart has a lot of similarities to how FBA works. You know, they both use the term buy box. Instead of FBA, it's WSF. The one thing is that Prime to Pro Seller badge transition, because the way the Pro Seller badge works is different than the way Prime works. So Prime's pretty straightforward. You either have it or you don't. And basically, if you don't, I don't know what you're doing. You should just have that anyways. So like, yeah, we're diving into a lot of these, again, those subtle nuances of how does that affect buy box winning, things of that nature. What's interesting, and I kind of like this so far, is every one of your SKUs has like a quality measurement, like that percentage of optimization. That's really interesting, but like price factors into that percentage. And it's really interesting because I'm manually testing a bunch of different things, just kind of seeing how it works in reality. And it's very interesting. So I don't have any great insights on that yet. Again, right now we're diving into a lot of stuff, wrapping our heads around it, making sure we understand those subtle nuances, talking with a lot of sellers. But this is an area that I'm spending a lot of time trying to really understand, not just obviously what it is, that's pretty straightforward, but like what's the implications of it? Because a lot of things on these platforms are not clearly defined. It's not like hey, here's what this is, here's all the things it affects. It's like 2 out of the 5 things that it affects are mentioned in documentation. The rest you just have to discover, right? Which is like kind of nice, kind of not nice. I mean, there are things in, this is true for Amazon and for Walmart, where there is something that is not documented in terms of some kind of functionality, but we discover that the functionality exists. There's zero mention that it works that way. So this is why we try not to rush things, because sometimes you, especially on the engineering side, you have to go in and just experiment and just see. We've just learned this with Amazon where, you know, again, it should work like X. It kind of actually works like Y, or X is never mentioned, but X totally exists and we can definitely do something cool with it. That's how we find these innovations within using different APIs. So that's what the team's spending a lot of this week doing, is just like poking around and be like, cool, well, what's possible, what's not actually possible here, what works the way it says it does, what, you know, all these different things. It's a lot, right? I wish it was as simple as here's the documentation, here's exactly how it works, go build it. No. It's never that easy, which I think is a good thing, because, you know, building software is fun and it should be a slightly creative thing. But as we find these insights, we will be sharing these. So I did just lay out a massive strategy for Walmart authoritative content. So we've covered a lot for Amazon, to the degree where I think we've covered everything possible on blogs. Like each week's blog, I'm like, man, I'm kind of struggling here. Walmart is completely untapped for us on the content side. Obviously, we have not been focused on that. So it's helping us learn a ton. It's helping us dive into the things that we like, which is, here's how that actually works, right? So like we'll explain how Walmart's BSR is different than Amazon's BSR, so everybody understands that, because I don't like sellers operating with, you know, 60% of the knowledge that exists, right? You're operating with blinders on. And so our whole goal on the content side is how do we reduce those blinders so that you can make better decisions? Because if you're coming in, you're assuming BSR equals BSR, you're going to have a bad time. So that's going to be fun. So there's a lot we're going through here. Let's see here. Ron, I spoke to Casey about the workflows. I want to know if there is a way to start the time in inventory for FBM sellers. If I have a workflow that's starts repricing when inventory shows up on Aura, can the timer start there for 30 days, 60 days, etc.? Great question. So the way the age of inventory workflow works, it's not a timer. Essentially what it's doing is we're looking at the age of inventory buckets, and we're trying to say, okay, well, is there units in any of these buckets? If that's true, then do X. It is theoretically possible, in case I'm curious to get your thoughts on this. where you could. No, that's actually kind of tough. No, okay, no, you could do this. You could basically do a workflow that triggers on a schedule. You post data 30 days out, and then you do a filter for that SKU, and then you do something that could be change the strategy.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that. And I do remember chatting with you about this, Ron, and I couldn't think of this. I mean, I think that would probably be the best workaround right now, having it set for like a 30-day timer, a 60-day timer, but you would have to recreate that workflow every time new
Every
inventory
SKU.
gets shipped in. So that's where it would definitely become a little bit more manual.
Right.
But if you do have, let's say, like one day where you get a majority of your inventory, maybe it's on like the first of every month, for example, then it would be a little bit easier to kind of simulate that age of inventory workflow, but it would be more manual.
You could encode something in the SKU, by the way. The way the
Yeah.
SKU filter works is you can enter in a string of text, and if that string of text is included in any SKU in any way, it will trigger. So what you could do, it's a little bit more manual work on the SKU creation side. And I would probably batch this. I probably wouldn't do like every day. I would probably say like, okay, between these 2 weeks, I'm going to, all these SKUs are going to have that date on it or something like that inside the SKU. And then I'm going to create a workflow that basically in 30 days from whatever day you're creating this, will check and say if any SKU contains this date or whatever you encode, then change the strategy. You could do that. But to Casey's point, you're doing that every single time, which is not really ideal. So we don't have like a true like timer in that way. Casey, we can't hear you, by the way.
Sorry, yeah. If you do go the SKU route there, it'd be interesting because let's say you wanted to switch strategies at the 30 and 60-day mark, you would have to have it be specific for each shipment, which would be a little bit easier than trying to simulate it via filtering by strategies or things like that, because then you'd end up with a whole bunch of different strategies that you're filtering by. So the SKU would probably be the best workaround, but yeah, you would still have to do a decent amount of manual work both on the SKU creation side and then managing your own schedule of when to flip things over and then market 30 days from now. So yeah, I think that would be the best way to simulate it. I always kind of refrain from workarounds that lead to a lot of manual work. I don't want to say that it's going to be perfect and have it be multi-step and lead to more headaches if it's not.
It's going to be complicated at the end. Like, you can technically do it, but it's going to be a lot of work, and we don't want you to have to do a lot of work is the point, but you can do that. So. Yeah. Okay, so Kirk got back to us here. This is good to hear. Okay, so I know that globally I can set the ROI percentage to, let's say, 40%. But if I have an ASIN that the buy box has dropped below my minimum ROI, I want to be able to just lower that ROI percentage lower than 40% for that specific ASIN. Okay, so basically, so we're talking about basically adjusting the min value. And instead of going in and manually overriding it, so explicitly saying, I want it to not be 25, I want it to be $20, you want to go and say, I just want to be, instead of 40%, like it's auto-calculating it, just give me 20%. That's interesting. I haven't heard that one before. That's actually pretty cool. So instead of a manual override always being a dollar amount, you would want that to be an ROI percentage. That's cool. I would highly recommend, because I've never heard this recommendation and I love it. Go to feedback.goor.com and add that as a feature request so we can start to track that. I'll check too, and if it doesn't happen, I'll add it for you. But the reason why I want you to do that is because it will link to your account. That way, as progress is being made, you'll get notifications and we can reach out and ask for feedback and stuff like that once we're able to get to it. That's a really cool one. Casey, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, and I'm still trying to make sure I'm wrapping my mind around it properly. So like essentially dropping your min price by a percentage instead of overriding it with a manual figure. Is that right?
So not dropping it by a percentage. So let's say the strategy is auto-calculating the min at 40% ROI.
Yep.
But I want it to go to 20% ROI. Instead of me having to run that calculation and then manually put in $20, Kirk wants to go in and say 20% ROI. You do the calculation. That's what I want.
That makes sense. Yeah. So essentially you could have like a field where you could enter percentage and then it would spit out whatever that price would be. And then you can input that price. That makes sense.
So same thing we do at the strategy level, but do that at the SKU level as well.
Yeah. Kind of providing an area for sellers to do that on the specific SKU. Yeah, that definitely makes sense, especially because ROI fluctuates so heavily from listing to listing based on costs, fee structures, all sorts of things like that. So yeah, would definitely simplify some of that work instead of trying to figure out on your own, all right, if it's this at this point, if I want it to be 10% lower, what does that look like? Yeah. So no, that definitely makes sense, Kirk. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how and potentially when we would be able to implement that. But
that's a cool one. Cause it makes sense, right? Like I don't want to have to do the calculation. I just know I'm willing to go lower than 40%. But I don't want to do the math. I just want to tell you what I'm willing to do. And you do the math for me with software.
Yeah. Yeah. It's almost like a cost calculator, but specifically just running on ROI or price calculator. Not a cost calculator. Yeah.
That's a great one.
And I know like we've had folks request, can you show like the ROI percentage on a manually set price? Which I see the merit in that as well, but this is similar in that arena of kind of having an automated function there.
Yeah. Kirk, I'm not gonna show that comment. No, I'm just I know some can do it, but this is a cool one. We really have not heard this feature request before, to my knowledge, but this is a cool one, so I appreciate that. Yeah, make sure you get it added there. It's going to be feedback.goor.com, and then I'll show this up here for everyone else to be able to see that. Nice. Some great questions so far. Appreciate it, everyone. We got plenty of time left here. About 20, a little over 20 minutes, but any other things we can start to dive deep into to keep me from talking about AI would be greatly beneficial. But no, it really has been interesting to dive into other marketplaces. One got brought up to me by a user called Mercado Libre. It's mainly a Spanish Amazon, basically. And they were saying the volume they're doing on this platform, pretty good, like 7 figures. So, there's plenty of platforms, but there's not a lot of platforms that can do enough volume for it to be worth your time. Apparently that one is worth a decent amount of time. So kind of interesting. So we're kind of seeing a lot of sellers, I think, testing different waters outside of the main ones, right? It used to be basically eBay and Amazon. Like that was the only ones, and eBay's always like the redheaded stepchild kind of thing, where it's like it's there, you can use it, nobody wants to. Now it's very much Amazon, Walmart, and I think some people are wanting to experiment and see what else is out there. Yeah, see Eric. Yeah, Mercado Libre is big, and that is true. I started to look into kind of how big they were, because after seeing sales in that platform of them doing $1 million a year in revenue, I'm like, okay, I'll pay attention. That's kind of interesting. It's one thing when somebody's like, oh, I like it. It's like, cool. How big's the volume? 20 grand a year. It's like, it's not really that enticing, but very interesting. So they were like, hey, could you build a repricer for that, basically? So it's on my mental list of things to look at and kind of, start to see where it's going. So I start to look into these platforms and say, what's their growth rate? How are they looking? What do sellers think about them? So it's been pretty fun. Let's see, Ron. So just so I understand, there's no way to code a start date for workflow based on when your item starts repricing. That is true. So the way the triggers of workflows work, you have 2. The listing was imported. That's a trigger. And then you have a schedule, and that could be repeating or one time in the future. The thing you really want is a new listing comes in, maybe a filter, and then you would set a timer action. We just don't have timer actions. This is something we can definitely take a look at, but you would want to say, hey, Wait 30 days, then do something. We do have pause repricing. That's not going to give you what you want, though. That is like a pseudo timer, but you're not going to be actively repricing when that is active. And I think there is a hard timeout on that. Like there's a max amount of time where we're able to do that. So it's something we could do. We could definitely add like an action component for workflows, which is a timer, and it just says whatever trigger happens, wait some period of time and then do something. So that could be interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, it'd be interesting if we could do like a workflow based on when an item was imported. That way you could do like items imported 30 days ago, do this. That would probably be the best way to like simulate that FBM type workflow.
But the only problem there though is if we're looking at the import date and you're replenishing that same SKU, that would break. Because there's only one import date, which is just when we got access to it. So, if you replenished it, it wouldn't re-trigger that. So that's where you kind of get into like the nitty gritty details of like how that would function in reality. I keep getting hit up for the Walmart Summit. Everybody I talk to is like, you have to go. It's insane. So I'm going to probably try to crash that this year. But apparently it's fantastic. There's actual, executives there having conversations. Developers are there, so you can actually have those conversations and share things that you want, things, bugs that you found, what have you. And that's really interesting. I know of a few big conferences that are having to redate when they do it in the year because Walmart has taken a lot of audience mind share during that period of time. So let's see, Eric. Buy box target won't avoid the price war, correct? Okay, so if you're using the buy box targeting strategy, will that avoid a price war? Depends on how it's being built. The buy box targeting strategy is a pre-configured strategy. That means you can make changes to it. If you're matching the price, it could still be a price war. You're just not influencing it further, right? What we tend to recommend is when you're in the buy box in that maintenance section to be able to raise your price. That will help a ton, as well as being able to jump to your max price once you've reached your min price. That helps kind of that reset period. In a lot of ways, at least in terms of rule-based strategies, it's really difficult to stop a price war. From my experience, you can really slow it down. You can't really stop it. Now, Maven's able to, again, you can't fully stop it, but it helps avoid it quite a bit. Because here's what's interesting. A lot of your repricers that are targeting the buy box are doing that. And even if they're repricing below by 1 penny. What's interesting is if Maven grabs the buy box at $20 and raises it to $25, raise the buy box to $25, where is the other repricing softwares going? Well, they're going to go close to 25 because they're targeting the buy box. So they might go to $24.99 and pull it, but guess what? We already raised it almost $5. So from that perspective, Maven's basically able to, I'm not going to use the term weaponized. I was going to use the term weaponized. It's able to take advantage of the behaviors during a price war to its advantage, right? You can't stop other people from repricing how they're going to reprice. But if we understand how they're doing it, we can use that information strategically ourselves. Rule-based strategies don't have that level of complexity to be able to do that. Now, they can still raise your price, but it's not a guarantee that when you raise your price, the buy box is going with you unless you're using an AI like Maven. So sometimes you can, not all the time. But Casey, I'm curious if what your thoughts are on this.
Yeah, I think you make a good point, especially on rules-based strategies. All you can really do is slow it down. For example, what I typically recommend is if you want to try and win the buy box, targeting that buy box, pricing 2 cents below is typically what I recommend. That just means that every time you price below, if you win and then someone else prices below and they win, you're only repricing below them by 2 cents. So if it does continue to ship to another seller based on their response to your pricing activity, it'll at least kind of mitigate the speed at which that price tanks.
Yeah.
If you're afraid of that, you can always match the buy box. But if that buy box does continue to change, you still kind of end up in a price war, just indirectly being a participant in that war as opposed to initiating it. And then, Maven will be probably your best option here. Maven does recognize, hey, this seller's pricing below us when we price below them. So we're going to stop doing that and just match that buy box, or that seller's price rather. And Maven does kind of on the flip side recognize, hey, when we price below them, they don't move. So we're going to continue to do that if it's successful. So Maven will be able to kind of parse through on a listing basis those specific scenarios or specific competition, but just the nature of repricing, sometimes it is unavoidable. You can always price above the buy box, but that's not going to lead to a higher buy box percentage.
Right.
So I think the best thing to do there is just ensuring you're setting what you would consider to be effective min and max prices. As long as you're operating within those parameters and you're fine with that, that's going to be the best thing you can do. Just with there being so much competition in that buy box rotating depending on that competition. All we really know for Amazon's algorithm for selecting the buy box winner is price, seller rating, and shipping times. So other than that, we don't know when they favor one over the other. Sometimes it's shipping depending on an item. Sometimes it's price, but sometimes you have to price further below a seller depending on your rating, their rating. So there's just a lot of movement going on. So I'd say use Maven in that scenario just to be able to take that all into account.
Yeah. A little follow-up here. So give me feedback on this. I have been using Buy Box Chaser. As soon as I get the buy box, move to Maven. Does that make sense? It does not, because that can happen so rapidly and so frequently that you as a human will not be able to keep up. Instead, like Maven's still going to try to grab the buy box, right? So switching over to using Maven in this example is not going to negate the buy box. You might get less buy box share, but your margin is going to go up. So that's not a bad thing. But this can happen in theory every 30 seconds, 24/7. There's just no way you could do that manually. So we're big fans of simplification. And so instead of you being able to say, okay, well, I got the buy box, let me switch over. You're going to do that back and forth so frequently that it's not going to be worth your time. I would rather you just move that listing to use Maven and let it do its thing and get back to sourcing. That's going to be the best use of your time. But great question, by the way. And this kind of goes to the point of how and why we made Maven the way we did. Because yes, in an ideal world, your strategies would change moment by moment, and every single listing would have a strategy designed for it. Good luck. You can't do it. So instead, we said, let's take a step back and say, well, what if we could build more like a model that could understand what's true, understand what needs to be true in terms of your strategy, and be able to adapt as the market, as the listing itself is changing and your competition. So instead of you having to go in and say, well, in this, now that I'm in this scenario, I'm going to go over here. Maven's just doing all this craziness for you. That's what we want. We want to basically hand over the crazy complexity over to software, and then us just manage the software. Otherwise, you are the software, and software is way cheaper than what you are worth per hour. So Terry, please clarify if Aura supports Walmart Now versus coming soon. Further, for sellers selling on both platforms, any insights as to Walmart sales versus Amazon? I currently view anything less than 10 to 20% of Amazon sales as a waste of time, i.e. a distraction versus growing what works in my view. This is why I have continuously not pursued Amazon Canada and international markets, but always open to revisit. This is a great question, or set of questions. Walmart is not currently available in Aura. That's all I'm going to say right now. We are working on some awesome things. So that's exciting. Christmas is coming soon. Now, in terms of what we're seeing, kind of that split, a lot of sellers are shifting over 100% to Walmart because of things like Section 3s, other types of deactivations, brand gating, things of that nature. So a lot of people are falling back to Walmart, but finding that they do like it. Now, Walmart is going to give you less velocity than Amazon. Amazon's still the behemoth. However, the margins are better on Walmart. So it kind of offsets itself a little bit, not entirely, in my opinion. I've seen and talked to a number of sellers who are slowly matching their revenue on Walmart against Amazon. So it's getting there. And these aren't massive sellers. Like Terry, I know how big of an account you are. It's going to be a different situation for you than the average seller. So I do want to give some context and highlight that. Now, do I think it's worth it? We've talked about this before, but I want to re-highlight how I think about it, because I agree with your perspective of it's kind of a waste of time. It's a distraction. 1000%. I've held that same perspective. What's interesting is now Walmart has become a risk mitigation strategy. Just being on the platform, even if it's not meaningful, means that if something were to happen to your Amazon account, you have a immediate place to go and recapture some percentage of those sales and not be down. That's a good thing. Whether you need that or not, that's per business by business case. However, I do believe now that the future of selling is going to be multi-channel. Walmart used to be a distraction, in my opinion, because it didn't do enough. It wasn't worth the time. But if you look at how fast they're growing market share, it's growing like crazy. They're investing a ton in growing the consumer side, which is going to increase that velocity. And the competitive landscape's vastly different, right? You got multiple millions of active sellers on Amazon, and on Walmart you have hundreds of thousands. So it's a different dynamic. That's not to say you should, but I think for the first time I have the opinion that you should look at it and you should consider it, and I think you should test it. Because if you can move a lot more of the same inventory you're already purchasing, right? Like, let's say you're doing wholesale. If you could increase your POs by 30% and shift over that 30% to Walmart and have pretty solid profit margins on that. Now your average profit margin just went up by some weighted factor. And you're not really doing that much additional work, right? You're shifting 30% over to Walmart, WFS. It might be worth taking a look at, right? I rarely recommend, hey, everybody should do this, because it just depends. But I am a big fan, at least right now, to say, take a look, see. But I do believe that the future of selling is going to be multi-channel in some way, shape, or form. Every platform has its own pros and cons. There is no perfect platform. But, pros and cons of each, right? Like, kind of take that portfolio approach like you would with stocks, right? Like, should you invest everything into Tesla? Probably not. Some people do. I'm an index guy. So I'm a bogglehead. So I want to say, okay, well, if, I don't think you should do all of them, but if Walmart's really growing their market share year over year, and there's some nice opportunities there, and the additional work is 10% to make an extra 30%, maybe that's worth taking a serious consideration on.
Yeah, I would almost look at it, instead of distraction versus growing, I would more so look at it as learning versus growing. So if growing is a bigger focus for you, then definitely just continue to focus on Walmart, continue to grow and optimize your workflows there. If you're curious about what Walmart could mean for your specific business, then, like Dylan said, splitting a percentage of your inventory over there, not 50-50, definitely a lower percentage than that, would be a great place to start. But if that's going to take away from you growing in some other areas or continuing to increase velocity on Amazon, then it's probably not worth it in your opinion. But that's how I would kind of look at it, especially with Walmart being so new, with there being so many kind of incentives for new sellers on Walmart right now. That can obviously change. So going a full 50-50 split and then having Walmart maybe changing the whole landscape in a few months is probably pretty risky. So I would either continue to just focus fully on Amazon, let the kinks get worked out on other sellers, or put a smaller percentage, maybe 10-20% of your inventory over there and see how that goes and adjust accordingly.
And for clarity too, I don't think it should be take 10% of your current inventory levels away from Amazon over to Walmart. It's purchase an additional 10% to test on Walmart, so you're not negating what you're doing on Amazon. I think either way, even in this portfolio approach, you should still be maximizing both opportunities. Where I think a lot of sellers are getting stuck is they're not understanding that these two things are now separate business units, BUs. Instead, they want to say, well, I just sell. Yes. But because there are such differences, I don't think you should, I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this correctly to get my point across. But basically, like, you need to isolate one and say, okay, I need to build up a team around this to maximize that opportunity while also doing the same thing in my current opportunity. And we do both in parallel. The moment you start to take one from the other, I think that becomes a problem because now it's an opportunity cost, right? And you don't want a new platform to go insanely well, but then just reduce all the opportunity you built up for Amazon. I think that would be really a bad situation. But again, if you treat ones like, okay, cool, I got two business units, we're good here. And that's basically what these larger brands do, right? Like Nike sells on every platform, right? Even first party. They will set up teams to say, you own, okay, this is my e-commerce team. Within that team, this person owns Target. This person owns Walmart. This person owns Amazon, whatever. And then they're maximizing their opportunities. And you at the top are kind of determining how much budget am I giving for each of these based on ROI, things of that nature. So now we kind of have this interesting problem where we have to make some decisions, right? Because obviously a dollar is a dollar. I can't just create more dollars out of thin air. So you want to be able to say, okay, well, if I'm seeing a better opportunity on platform B than on platform A and my dollars go further, then I'm going to spend more on B than A. Right. So again, it gets a little bit more complicated. That's the reality of it. But I think, at least in my opinion, that creates amazing opportunity at the same time. Let's see, Terry, is DataSpark the current tool like Keepa for to Amazon? Basically, yeah. There's a lot of software being built out on the Walmart side. There's also Sellify. I don't think they're quite to the Keepa kind of level in terms of what we're thinking here, but DataSpark's probably the best counter to that. Yeah, Ron. Yeah, exactly. Don't want to nerf one to buff the other. Exactly. Thank you. You said it way clearer than I could. Ron, I appreciate that. Ron, this also tells me that you played World of Warcraft, to use the term nerf and buff, but we're linked up, my man. We're linked up. I dig it. See, the nerds get it. The nerds get it. There's always an example from video games. I love it. All right, so we're going to wrap up here for time. This was a fantastic conversation. So lots of RPGs. LOL. Yep. Yeah, I knew it. So listen, we appreciate everybody making time, having great questions for us. It allowed us to dive into some fun stuff, even some new stuff, and get some feedback from you guys. So really appreciate that. We do this every Wednesday from 2 to 3 p.m. EST. Open office hours. There's no format. We just get in here, geek out with you guys, share some stuff we're learning, and just have an awesome hour together. So we appreciate everybody making the time, and we will see you guys next week.
Yeah, thanks again, folks. See you soon.
Awesome.